We have brand new CNN polling this morning, and those numbers are looking rough for President Biden. It could be a troubling sign for Democrats and the president's hopes for re-election in 2024. Biden's approval rating sinking to 39%. Nearly 60% of voters think Biden's policies are making the economy worse, and close to 70% of Democrats want somebody else to run for president. His overall approval rating among Democratic voters, that's slipping from July. And when it comes to hypothetical matchups between Biden and the leading GOP presidential candidates, it's a tight race with no clear winner.
Except for Nikki Haley, who in this hypothetical matchup is leading President Biden by 6 points. Donald Trump ahead by 1 point of Biden. This all comes right before President Biden heads off on a big foreign trip. He said to meet with world leaders at the G20 summit in India. Happy to be joined this morning in studio by our political director, David Chalian, with all this new polling. And I mean, some people think polls. This one, to me, is totally riveting and fascinating about how Americans think Joe Biden is handling his job, including Democrats.
Yeah, and it's going to set off some alarm bells in the White House, no doubt. You noted his approval rating is down at 39%. 61% of Americans disapprove. He's been hanging at that low point, guys, for quite some time. We talk about the mood of the country 14 months out from a presidential election. Not that great. 3 in 10 Americans, that's it, say things are going well in the country. 7 in 10 say things are going badly in the country. And 58% of Americans in this poll say that Joe Biden's policies have actually worsened economic conditions in the country. Only 24% say they've improved economic conditions. This is why we hear him talking about Bidenomics every day he's out and about in the country.
David, the president is the oldest president in history. He was this morning, he will be tomorrow. That's just the reality. And White House officials acknowledge that, don't love talking about it, but have long made the case that's not the kind of pervasive issue for voters. It's not going to be the determinant factor. What does this poll show?
Well, it's certainly on the mind of voters. We'll see how important it becomes, but it clearly is a major concern. We asked folks, Phil, are you seriously concerned that Biden's age might negatively affect his ability to serve a full term? 3/4 of Americans are indeed seriously concerned. 3/4 of Americans don't agree on anything, but there's concern there. You see it here, too. Seriously concerned about his current mental and physical competence being negatively impacted by his age, and seriously concerned that his understanding of the next generation's concerns are impacted. 68% say that. And the economy, as we talked about, that is what is behind these numbers. Why Joe Biden is in a sort of dead heat, margin of error race with nearly every Republican tested. Poppy noted that Nikki Haley is the exception to that. She's running outside the margin of error. But look at this. Trump, margin of error race, no clear leader. DeSantis, Pence, Scott, Ramaswamy, Christie, they are all with no clear leader. And I just want to note, guys, one other thing that is going to cause agita for the White House team is this motivation factor. Are you extremely motivated to vote in next year's presidential election? Look at this. Republicans and Republican-leaning independents have a 10-point advantage over Democrats on that score.
That really matters, how people feel on that front. David, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
So let's talk about what these numbers portend. 2 people who served up close with Joe Biden is former White House Communications Director Kate Bedingfield, also CNN political commentator and former senior advisor to Barack Obama, David Axelrod. David, you look at these numbers, and they're not just not good, they're bad.
Yeah, Poppy, I heard you say they were fascinating. I forget what the other word you used. I'm not so sure that's how the president will receive them over his morning coffee this morning. These numbers are not good, and they're consistent with most of the other polling that we've seen. The country's in a sour mood. He's not getting credit for what I think is a fairly substantial list of achievements, and there is real concern about his age, and that has been true for some time. It continues to be true, and the reality is, if this were a referendum, he would be in deep trouble. The fact, and David just noted it, the fact that he is competitive with the guy who is the runaway frontrunner for the Republican nomination, who has some significant problems of his own, is what he's looking at. And, there's an expression in sports that, sometimes you have to win ugly. And I think that's what lies ahead here for this president and this White House.
All right, Kate Bedingfield, when we both worked on separate sides of the West Wing, I learned very early on, wandering into your office and asking straight up about polling on any given day was likely not to elicit the most friendly response.
I welcomed it.
You always had answers and kind of explanations, or this is why this matters, this is why you're missing this, that, or the other. What are people missing here that the White House, that the political team for the re-election campaign knows that they're not seeing?
Well, remember, polls don't get asked in a vacuum, and there's a lot of information that doesn't get folded into a question the way it's posed to somebody who's responding to a poll. So, you have voters raise, for example, that they would like to see someone else other than Joe Biden as the nominee, but then when they're asked specifically who that would be, that number drops down to 1%. And so what you don't see here is people being asked about how they feel about where Republicans stand on abortion, on guns. And we saw that dynamic play out in 2022 when people went to the polls and largely rejected what Republicans were offering. So I think what we aren't seeing here, and what it's sort of easy to look at a poll and get really sucked into the numbers, although I'll tell you, the Biden White House is not going to be rattled by this, because their view is, there are going to be 500 polls between now and Election Day. But there's a lot of information that isn't here that's a reminder that campaigns don't happen in a vacuum, and it's on the Biden campaign to make this election a choice and to make it about the contrast between what Republicans are offering and what Biden's offering. That's a challenge. I don't think anybody's saying that's easy. I don't think the Biden White House would say that's easy, but that's the challenge before them, is to really make this about the contrast. As Biden would say, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative.
David, what about the Nikki Haley aspect of all of this? That she's the one who beats Biden in this hypothetical matchup by 6 points.
Yeah, no, look, I think she benefited from that debate. Obviously, she stands out from the field. She's the only woman in the field. And she has significant general election advantages, but she's sitting at 5 or 6% in the Republican polls. One of the issues here has been that Republicans themselves believe that Trump is the strongest candidate they have. And there has not been a coalescence around any other candidate who could challenge him for the nomination. She has a task in front of her to win a Republican primary. One of the paradoxes of our contemporary politics is what it takes to win a Republican primary often makes you less appealing as a general election candidate, because you have to tack so far to the right. So we'll see how she navigates that. But right now Donald Trump is the runaway front runner, and it's not clear that she or anyone can overtake him.
Kate, Poppy was talking about this, flagged this for me last night, and we've been talking about it this morning. And it's something you and I think, have actually talked about over the course of the last 2 years. And that is that there's just kind of a general discontent in the country that's hard to overcome based on the last couple of years, COVID and the pandemic and all these different factors. There's a column from Bret Stephens where he says, in part, the news isn't all that good. Americans are unsettled by things that are not always visible in headlines or statistics, but are easy enough to see. And I think that kind of defines the disconnect between legislative accomplishments, the current state of the macroeconomy, those types of things the White House wants to talk about, and how people are feeling. How do you kind of thread that together if you're the Biden administration and campaign?
I think there's certainly truth to that, and that's absolutely something that the president recognizes. When he is talking to his staff about what he wants to say when he's going out to speak, he's always very focused on making sure that he is talking about connecting with people's concerns. He believes that it's important for a president to show that he understands that people are feeling doubtful, are feeling dubious after essentially a once-in-a-generation pandemic that kind of rocked our world, more or less. So it is a challenge. I think for the president and for the Biden campaign, they have to continue to show that they connect with people's sense of unease, but also remind them about how much has been done, and critically, convey a sense of optimism. Remind people that we are on a good path and that there's opportunity for things to get better. I think he has a lot of proof points. He can point to a lot of things that he's been able to get done in a very divided Washington. He's been able to accomplish, historic job creation, a historic infrastructure bill that's fixing people's roads and bridges, obviously the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot that he can point to say, listen, I've been able to get things done to make your life better, and there's so much more to do. And so conveying that sense of optimism, I think, will be critical for the campaign and for the president.